Weer allemaal die straf. Dus die YouTube afzetten, gaat dat wat beter gaan.
Ik zie onszelf.
Alright.
We gaan iets zien. Ah nee. Is er geen Drupal emoji?
I wish.
I don't think so.
Ik ben altijd in de creator.
Okay, so good evening everybody. Welcome to the Dazzle live stream. So we've received a couple of questions, and hopefully we can give some answers to them, and hopefully it helps a bit. So first of all, what I want to do is go a short tour around the table to introduce all the team members currently present here. So I'm going to start to my left, Olivier.
Hello everybody, the hundreds of people watching us right now. I'm Olivier, I'm technical lead at Dazzle. I've been working with Drupal for over 12 years and with Drupal 8 for about 2 years, I think. Actually kind of the same as Joris, so the same as Joris.
Maybe a little bit less. My name is Joris. I've been working with Drupal for about 4.5 years now. I've been working with Drupal 8 and on Drupal 8 since DrupalCon Barcelona, which was almost 3 years ago. I did a couple of things on Drupal core, and I'm mostly my contrib specialty or branch of things that I know something about is the search ecosystem.
Alright,
that's Joris. I'm Peter. I'm Dazzle's main front-end developer. I do some Drupal theming, I do some Drupal site building, and various other small things in between. I also teach at the Thomas More High School about Drupal theming and about site building and CMS systems in general. And hopefully we can give some people some really clever answers, some really good solutions. So yeah, that's me.
alright. So I'm Kevin. I also work at Dazzle. I do some Drupal development as well, but I'm mostly consulting as an agile coach, so different ways of working and so on. I'm very familiar with Drupal 7. I also started with Drupal 8 about a year ago. So yeah, hopefully we can help in providing some answers. So the format of this evening is we've received some questions, so we're going to walk through them, and like I said earlier, hopefully going to give an answer that can help. Meanwhile, there's also the YouTube chat available, and everybody is most welcome to ask questions on the chat box. There's also the option to send us a tweet, but I think the YouTube chat box is more efficient. So one of the questions we received was following. I'm new to Drupal, and it also mentions between brackets Drupal 8. Where do I start? I want to kick off with a good place to start is always the official Drupal documentation, which you can find at drupal.org/documentation. But there are, of course, a whole bunch of options to learn Drupal. I think for me in the beginning it was mostly just Googling. This has been my best friend since forever. And also YouTube. If you just type learn Drupal, you will find a lot of videos helping. Now, I don't know if there's anybody here around the table that can or wants to add something to my answer. What are good ways to start with Drupal?
Drupal 8.
Drupal 8, yes.
There's a media current series, a video series that's quite helpful. The Reddit, the Drupal subreddit is not super active, but I've seen most questions answered in like at most a day, so that one is quite helpful as well. And of course there's IRC and Slack, which might be easier because you can provide, there's real-time actual feedback from people. There's a couple of IRC channels, but Drupal Contribute and Drupal Support are really good ones that can help.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a combination of more things, Slack, IRC, teach yourself, search.
Yes. And to be more specific, if you're coming from Drupal 7 and you've never worked with Symfony, do the Symfony tutorial. Then you can understand how everything works together and why stuff is organized like it is now.
Yes,
then you can understand Drupal 8. If you know Drupal 7, you do the Symfony tutorial and then you can continue with Drupal 8.
Yes,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's only needed if you're actually planning on developing with Drupal 8. If you can do a lot of things with just site building and contributed modules, and for those you don't need to learn Symfony. Symfony is only needed if you're actually going to develop stuff with Drupal 8. But
true that.
The Symfony cookbook, the documentation, the quick start guide is really good. And it helps you understand more about the services and that kind of architecture. So that helps.
I think that Drupal is still one of the CMS or frameworks with the highest, or most likely one of the highest learning curves. It's not easy to start with Drupal, especially in developing with Drupal. So that was one of my challenges. That was in Drupal 7 also, but in Drupal 8 the same. It was a lot of information because you have so many abilities to do with Drupal. Drupal is as powerful as the things you plug into it or the things you develop. So yeah, it's not always easy, but don't give up. That's important. Another question was, and I thought it was actually interesting in Drupal 8, is what is a core update? Now this question, I think it's more related to with all the vendors now in Drupal 8, are they part of the core update if you update or not?
I think they are. A core update, especially a minor update, that means going from 8.3.1 to 8.3.2, usually doesn't have any vendor updates, but it can have those. But as soon as one of the vendors or the libraries that we as a Drupal community use to improve the Drupal project, as soon as one of those is updated within Drupal core, you should also update those on your website. But don't go updating them without having Drupal helping you. So just only use the vendors or the restrictions set in the composer.json that Drupal provides. So a core update is, I think, the entire package of going from one version to the next, and that includes vendors.
Well,
that question actually comes from me about the vendors. Does a security update in a vendor library triggers a Drupal core update?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And it triggers as a security upgrade, which means that security updates are only security things that happen in those releases. So that means that from 8.3.2 to 8.3.3, if that's a security release, then only the security things will happen. And if that happens to be a security problem inside of a vendor directory or library, that's only that happens. So no other things, no functionality, no new things, no bug fixes. It's only security.
That actually also brings me to the question: do I need to use Composer? I think there the answer is no, but I think we can. I think we can assume that it's the best option.
So there is Ludwig. It's actually quite a funny name, or at least I think it is. Ludwig. So Symfony is, as we all know, a music thing. And Ludwig is the first name of Ludwig von Beethoven, a deaf composer. And Ludwig is a module that allows you to use composer libraries without actually using Composer. And I think that's quite a funny thing. It's built by billions of commerce guys. And it's a way to use Drupal without having to use Composer. So the management of all the dependencies is no longer inside Composer, but it is on the developer, which is very, very hard. And if you're taking the plunge and upgrading to the new system and doing all the things the Drupal way, then using Composer is a good thing to do. And you don't need to upgrade or to use Composer straight away. Mm-hmm. But as soon as you want to install some contributed module that uses an external package, it is very, very useful. So either through Composer or through Ludwig. But Drupal doesn't enforce it. There's a couple of modules that use those external packages, such as Search API Solver, the address module, the commerce module. There's a lot of payments providers that use external packages, as well as others such as GeoField is one that uses a geo plugin. There's a location specific thing that uses a Composer package. So it's not needed, but if you want to go the Ludwig route, then you're actually doing more work than you should be doing. So Composer is not required, but very much very easy. Well, not easy. It's a simpler way to do the dependency management than having to do everything yourself.
Yeah, I think one reason for me is also so here we also use Git as a versioning system, and basically our repository is smaller because we don't include all the vendors, all the libraries,
all the contrib modules, all the contrib teams, Drupal core itself.
So when you check out the project locally, for example, or on an environment, it's only on the installation that these things are being downloaded and installed. So that's also a big advantage of it.
Which has risks on its own, because you can have another version of a library when you deploy them locally.
No.
No?
As long as the composer.log file is committed to the repository.
That's a specific version.
That's a specific hash. It's a commit hash. So composer.log is basically a list of everything that's installed, and the git hash, or the SVN hash, I think it also uses SVN, or the direct link to a zip of the exact version that you specified. So there is no way of there ever being any differences as long as composer.log is committed to your repository and you use composer install to get the dependencies. One thing that I also wanted to mention about that is that Composer is not just downloading modules. Composer also has hooks so you can hook into events such as install or update. But it's also a way of wiring up the autoloader. So all the classes in Drupal 8 are being loaded through an autoloader, and that autoloader can be dumped to disk, so it doesn't have to do discovery on the fly, and it's faster. And that's one thing that you can use Composer for as well. So it can lead to a small, very, very small performance improvement. But every performance improvement that you get without actually having to do anything is good. It just requires you to do Composer install -- dump autoload. And there's also -o, which is optimize autoloader to make it even faster. So that's one thing that we do in our deployment scripts is we use Composer's dumped autoloader.
So you don't need to use Composer, but yes, you need to use Composer because it should make your life easier.
I think our general advice is that if you're afraid of Composer, it's fine to stay away from it. But we do advise that you look into it, try to get up and running with it, because the moment that you start to feel somewhat comfortable with Composer, it can really be a time saver. It can uncause a lot of problems in the future. It can prevent a lot of problems in the future. So I think it's a worthwhile technology, even though we struggle with it at times. I think we all agree that the time we invested in it was worth it.
Okay, if you're getting started as a site builder and you want to get your Drupal online on a shared hosting where you don't have shell access or you don't know that, which is one of the reasons why they started Ludwig.
Yeah.
You're fucked, eh?
There's not really, because there's two projects out there. One is called Composer Cat, and the other one is called I don't know the name by heart, but let me find it. It's built by Mats Klamman, so it's called Conductor, which is also a play on words with Symfony, and that is a graphical user interface built to simplify Composer usage. So I'll paste the link inside the chat for anyone who wants to find that. As soon as I find the chat.
And also afterwards we'll leave it as a comment on the video. So
but Conductor or Composer Cat are really good ways if you're afraid of the command line or you're not very familiar with it, which I can totally agree with, that it's somewhat scary. Those are really good ways of getting started with using Composer without having to use the command line. And one thing that you said, Olivier, which is if you want to have a shared hosting that doesn't have shell access, you can use Composer on your local machine to build the package and then just upload everything you want to go to the server. Which is something that I would recommend anyway, because Composer is a tool that's built for developers, not with security in mind. So that doesn't mean it's insecure, but it's not built as with security as like the first requirement. So
if you're using shared hosting to build a site and you want to try Drupal, I don't think you're able to set up a local development environment that use Composer.
Well, I mean, if it's your first time experience, or if it's like your first year building with Drupal, then no, it's probably a bad idea to get involved with Composer, because it is quite complex. The learning curve is quite steep, and you will get lost in that. But if you've been working with Drupal 8 for at least a year, then we would definitely advise that you look into it, because at that point you should feel comfortable enough with Drupal to start expanding into stuff like Composer. And once you get to that level, Composer can be a real time saver. But you always need to, well, I think learning software, especially a complex system like Drupal, take it at your own time. Take it in the steps that you feel comfortable with. Don't try and do too many things at the same time, because then you will probably stop with it before you get any real results. And if you keep your focus rather small, just focus on your Drupal site doing what you want it to do, then you'll probably feel much more happier with the end result. So I think that's a bit of the general vibe that we have in-house, is that we can definitely recommend it to power users, to people who are experienced with Drupal, but even to people who are at a level that we can call medium or something, or like in between. We would advise to look into Composer. For absolute beginners, I would definitely not start with Composers. It's the same thing, like I said earlier, I teach this stuff in school, and I don't teach them about Composer because it's too complex for them. Yeah.
All right. Which brings me to my next question. What makes us most excited about Drupal 8? So what do we, as Dazzle or individuals, what do we love about Drupal 8?
Twig.
Twig.
As a teamer, Twig is for me. Well, I worked in Drupal 7 for a couple of years, and the difference with Twig, with Drupal 8, is that it's much easier to understand, it's much easier to use, it's much more powerful in the sense that it requires way less effort to achieve much more complex things compared to PHP template, where you actually needed to write PHP from time to time. Twig offers you so many tools and stuff that well, the need to write PHP in your templating or in your teaming layer should be non-existent in Drupal 8. And for me as a teamer, it gives me such freedom. The teaming layer is well split off of everything else, which gives me my own little box to work in, to do in what I want. You can extend templates if you want. It's a really mature templating system that offers a lot of features straight out of the box. So that's something that makes me very happy.
For me personally, it's the fact that Symfony is now in the game. It opens up the Drupal community, and it allows the people who have worked with Symfony or are still working with Symfony to now also start using Drupal. And that's one of the changes I actually liked most, because Drupal was rather small, I would say, as a community, but now it suddenly the doors are now open for even more people to join in and make Drupal even a better system than it already is. So, any other thoughts on what we love on Drupal 8?
I don't know if it's love, it's just changes. The configuration management makes it easier to build and release and have a development pipeline, but it has some negative sides, cons as well. And that's with translation, config translation and interface translations. They either should be both in the repository or both online. That's something we've been struggling with. And then the improved translation handling. But I liked the Node translations instead of one Node in multiple languages.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that make me really excited and really happy. One of them being the plugin API, because there's now one way of making plugins. And it's really easy, and very coupled to that, there's the PHP unit that's now included in Drupal. So the plugin API allows you to write very small and discrete classes, that will do one thing and one thing well. And PHP Unit is really good at testing classes, so having the plugin API to make really small things, functionalities, and PHP Unit to test them is something that can take a lot of the. As a contrib module maintainer, I feel more confident because I know that a lot of my code is tested both on the unit level as well as on the integration level, and that makes me very happy because it allows me to be confident that my code is written well and that it does what it's supposed to do. And having that as an industry standard or as a thing throughout our community makes me really happy and confident that the code quality level is good.
Yeah.
And that's something that's really being promoted through plugins and PHP Unit, and that makes me happy.
All right.
You look happy.
So a development question here was also, is Drupal commerce at this current state, is it stable enough to use in production? Well, is it? I think it is, and we've already used it in production. There are some things where I think, yeah, okay, that's definitely not finished yet, but there's also no stable release yet at the moment.
No. There's only there's a release candidate out.
Yeah. So yeah, but we've worked with it and in production and it works. We've also created the Worldline module for it as a payment method. So that's one of the things where we had to experiment in between alpha releases and see if that works. So yeah, I think we can say that you can give it a try and see for your use case if everything is already covered today. Any other thoughts on that question? No? So another question was also, how do I upgrade Drupal 8.2x to 8.3x?
So it kind of depends.
Why is that difficult?
It's difficult because there was for us, because we were using Zerp Foundation as a base theme. And we were also using Display Suite. And Display Suite stopped the 2.x branch and started a new 3.x branch to be compatible with core 3.x because the layout plugin contributed module kind of got moved into core, but is now layout discovery. So some namespaces changed, some classes changed, but it more or less does the same thing. But since Display Suite now had to be compatible with the other with core 8.3.x, that worked perfectly. However, Zerp Foundation was still lagging behind a little bit because it was also using some layout plugin classes, and so there was a little bit of a mismatch between dependencies because Zerp Foundation wasn't up to speed yet. However, there's patches out there in the issue queue that resolve those problems, but that was the only thing that we had any trouble with.
So the problem is when you use Drupal 8.2 with Display Suite 2,
Yes.
you need to use Display Suite 3 with Drupal 8.3.
Yes, exactly. And because from 8.2 to 8.3, in 8.2 they needed layout plugin as a contrib module, and in 8.3 it uses layout discovery, which is in core. So there was a bit of a mismatch there because the dependencies changed. One of the things that we also had to so there's an upgrade hook in Drupal in Display Suite that removes the layout plugin module, but that means that you need to have the layout plugin module still installed in your code base before you can upgrade, because otherwise the update hook won't work. So we had to require the layout plugin module as a separate thing, and then do the upgrades, and then we could remove layout plugin again.
Woohoo.
Yeah, what a fuzz. Another question here is, if I want to learn Symfony, what parts should I learn or definitely learn?
So as Olivier mentioned earlier, the cookbook or the start of the on the Symfony website itself is really good. But there's two things that are really visible inside Drupal. One of them is the HTTP kernel, which is the request and the response classes, as well as everything surrounding those. That's a really visible thing in Drupal 8 code, as well as the event system, so the event dispatcher, event listener, and the event classes. Those are new and they are being used in a lot of places as well. So they are quite useful to learn. A lot of the other parts aren't as useful to learn, such as the serializer or the routing or the parts of Doctrine that we ship, because you shouldn't have to study those on your own. There's actually, I think, 19 components of Symfony in Drupal core, and I think only the event system and the HTTP kernel are ones that you really should look into as a separate thing to learn.
Okay.
But you did that a little bit more recently. Do you have any other things over here?
I don't know. The vendor libraries, are those all Symfony libraries, or do generic PHP libraries work as well?
Generic PHP libraries work as well.
Should work as well.
They do. They
As
do.
long as they use namespaces.
As long as they use PSR 0 or PSR 4. So currently in Drupal core we have a couple of things from Doctrine, such as the annotations, the cache collections, and some other things. You have an easy RDF library, which is not related to Symfony in any way. There's a library by Fabien Potentier, which is quite related to Symfony because it's by its creator. There's Guzzle, which is also not related. There's a couple of other things, such as a virtual file system stream, which is not related to Symfony. There's PHP units. There's some of the dependencies for PHP units. Then there's, of course, a whole lot of Symfony things, such as the class loader, the console, the debug library, the HTTP foundation and kernel, and some polyfills. But there's also 4 Zend libraries in Drupal core. So there's from all over the place, basically, everything that works. So everything that has PSR 0 or PSR 4 will work in Drupal core, and will work with Drupal. And there's even, I've noticed some people actually creating libraries first and then integrating them into Drupal, so there's lots of ways to do it.
All right.
Okay. I also added a question. I think this is one that's been in my mind for some time now, and I know that Joris can give a quite good answer on this one. It's how stable is the search API ecosystem, and what's upcoming? What new features can we expect? What's the plan? So.
Okay, so Search API proper is stable. It has a 1.3 release, and that's stable, and nothing will change. Well, nothing big will change anyway in that for the coming years, I think. Search API Solar is also stable and also in a good state. I don't think we'll see any big changes for that either. And then there's autocomplete. That's being worked on by Thomas Seidel, Drunken Monkey on Drupal.org. He's been sponsored by a Danish company to work on that until we release beta for it. So that's on its way. And for Search API location, we have a Summer of Code student who's working on it, and that's coming along nicely. For Search API sorts, that currently has a beta release, and I don't think that will see many changes before going to a stable. I think the only thing that's needed for that is time. And facets is still in alpha. That has about 10 blockers, and
Sorry.
About half of those are on needs review, and they won't get committed without reviews. So I think that won't change before DrupalCon Vienna.
All right.
Where we hope to be with a couple of people from the Search API ecosystem to sprint and finish things and do things. So that'll be good.
All right. Another question was, what can I do to have configuration that is environment specific, such as, for example, the site title to be different in my local or in an acceptance environment opposed to the one in production?
So there's a couple of ways to do it. The one we use currently is overriding it through settings.php and having different configuration in branches.
Yeah.
So we have a branch for develop, a branch for production, and each branch has branch specific configuration.
So it's a mix.
It's a mix.
Yeah, there are some, I think another option is to have your settings file the same, but have them include another file that contains the environment variables, and then that file is being written by, I don't know, your deployment pipeline or whatever. But settings PHP works pretty good for us, I think.
For the amount of configuration that differs between environment, for us that's sufficient. Because I think anyway.
Yeah,
For now it's sufficient.
The only things we put in a settings PHP file, or we should, is API keys or passwords or stuff like that. All the rest should be in the config in the branches.
Yeah.
Well, there are indeed options. Like config exclude is one of these things.
Yeah, there's config split, there's config ignore. There's about 7 or 8 different modules that tackle that problem space. I don't have any specific
configuration is still a bit tricky in D8, I think, for some cases. It's working. I don't know if it's already optimal, or maybe it's just me trying to do something special, but in some cases I still struggle with it. So
we actually received our first comment on the chat from Martin. Thank you, Martin, for giving us a quick comment. He's actually said that you can also create, well, there's another possibility, and that is through creating separate config directories for each of your environments, which I believe was a thing that we also experimented with for a while. I think a bit of the gist of this question is, like, I think you just need to find something that works for your situation, that kind of does what you need it to do, because there are a lot of solutions with it. We tried most of them, and the one that works best for us right now, we feel, is by just putting it in different configuration branches, so we actually do it on a Git level. But like I said, there are alternatives. This is not the...
Yeah, that's... Martin, that's actually a question that I wanted to ask you. So, if you're using a different directory for per environment. How do you diff between those? Is there an easy way to do that, or?
You give the two directories, that's not a problem. But why didn't we do it like that? I don't remember.
Yeah.
But we looked at the options about 9 months ago, I think, and then we decided to go that way, and now it has evolved, so we should take the document and look why we didn't choose a directory per environment. There was a reason for that, which I don't remember.
Yeah, me neither. I remember that we discussed it, but I don't remember why.
Well, with some luck, maybe Martin will comment some more. I'll keep you guys updated if you're ready.
The reason is because you cannot do your merges correctly. If you have two directories, one per environment, you can export. How do you put changes from one environment to the other? That's impossible with incorporating your differences. If you work from staging to production, you can do, you develop in develop, you do merge to master, and you do your specific changes on the master branch. Subsequent changes other than that one will not override your changes in master. So as long as you go in that direction, you can have different settings in production and develop without any problem, and you can retain your history. The only problem comes with hotfixes, because then you have a merge in the other direction. But then you need to clean it up, just like you would have to with separate directories.
Yeah, we should definitely revise. Like you said, it's been a couple of months now. Check if there are maybe better solutions.
Joris sent an article pretty recently, but it doesn't solve the problem. You will have issues with all the solutions, and I think the Git way shows you the issues the fastest.
Mm-hmm.
You have a merge, you have a conflict, you can solve that conflict, you have all your history, you can diff, you have everything.
Mm-hmm.
Then for variables, that's in settings.php, and we sometimes misuse what is state instead of config for some things.
Yes.
All right. We've got a reaction from Martin.
Yes,
Martin
it sure
actually replied that what he said was the fact that everyone in the community is doing it differently is an issue, and I think we all agree on that. The feeling I at least had is that when I first saw of configuration synchronization was that yes, this will solve everything. And then we came into practice and we're still almost daily taking backups from production to QA just because we need to put over some content. And there are some issues like with translations that we're really struggling with. Why can't everything in translations be either in configuration or not? So yeah, I think there are definitely some improvements that can be made in that area. Luckily, this is all open source, so we can make those contributions ourselves. Anyway, I think that was time well spent on the configuration split,
indeed.
or on configuration.
So the next one is multilingual in Drupal 8 working 100% out of the box now? I think the language system is pretty good, but there still are some issues once in a while. An example I was working on lately was the option to have account administration pages, so that you as a user can say I want to have English as my language when I work in the admin screens, although the site only exists in Dutch, for example. It's still a bit buggy because if you are on the website looking at the front page, then the admin toolbar will then be put into Dutch. Now there is some work in progress already on the issue. So I'll give the example. I have a link here, so I will put it in the chat as well, and in the comments for the people watching this video later. But yeah, there are still some options. I don't know if you guys have any other experiences with issues with the language system.
A lot.
Okay, yeah, do you have a couple of examples
The
besides?
fact that one Node ID supports all the languages, so revisions also increase each time you do anything to each language. So, for example, for the Workbench module, that's a problem. Currently, you cannot have a node published in one language and not published in another. That's an issue. We have an issue with one of the sites where where a node changed language on the way, and that's just not solvable. It complicates things if you think per language, but now you really have to think per node. So from the moment you need something different in different languages, you're stuck, or you need to make a new node.
Mm-hmm.
But you cannot relate nodes anymore as translations of each other.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts on multilingual?
Yes, and then UI translation versus config translation. That's also an issue, because you cannot see on the front end, is this config or is this UI? And the customer can change UI himself, but not config.
Mm.
So that's an issue. If you make really big enterprise sites, you can freeze translations, you can translate everything at once, you can use PO files. But if you have smaller clients which do not want to pay $1,000 for translating one string and going through dev, test and production, you need to enable them to translate everything through the UI. And that has been a big pain the last year.
Yeah, true. Next up is what are the modules Dazzle uses most and which are recommended? I think since Drupal 8 there's a lot of stuff in core now that's, for example, views. Most used modules and that can actually serve your base functionality of a website, like views is a good example, are in core. Things like Pod Auto, for example, are also commonly used. Paragraphs, display suite. I think Peter can talk a bit about paragraphs later. I don't know, am I forgetting modules?
I don't think so.
What was the question?
What are the commonly used modules
Okay.
by Dazzle in general? So views, blocks, Pod Auto.
Well, we made a little list. Let's just go over it quickly.
Yeah,
maybe.
well,
Well, for site building, we use mainly a lot of core stuff like blocks, views, all the default stuff that Drupal gives us, and then there's the really obvious ones like Path Auto, your rel redirects. I think no site can really do without either of those. Like Kevin said before, we use paragraphs mainly because almost none of our content types have a body field anymore. We just give a paragraph field in which we always supply very specific paragraph types that are specifically measured so that they can create the optimal amount of different pages while still limiting them in the way that they can actually input their text through the WYSIWYG editor. So that is a big one for us. Also Display Suite, which gives us a lot more control over the managed display UI interface. Allowed formats is another module that we've been using frequently in conjunction with paragraphs and Display Suite, just so that we can we create specific CK editor, text editor profiles, and we only limit those to specific paragraph types so that you can only do exactly what we intend you to do with a specific paragraph. That is something that allowed formats help us with. Another very obvious one is web forms, which is, I believe, still the best solution for any type of form creation or management that you could do on a Drupal site. Also with the recent switch over to the YAML forms, web forms has become a really mature and really powerful module. They can do quite a lot of things without having to go very deep into complex matters. Then some other smaller helper modules is like, for example, the read more module, which is it's a very basic module that just gives us a little field, a read more field. So if you need to output a teaser with a little read more text and you actually need to change that read more text, that's a very good module for it. We used to also use the URL formatter module so that we could output images with only just a path, but since 8.3 that one is not necessary anymore since that became core. For CK Editor, for example, Linkit is a module that we install every time. It just offers the linking functionality but with autocomplete, so that the user of the site can he will actually get suggestions when linking items through the CK Editor. For user management is role
Linkit
assign.
does more, eh?
Excuse me?
Linkit does more. It's also a token that gets replaced on your front end always with the correct link.
Yes.
So even if the alias of a target node changes, it will have the correct link in the content.
Yep. So what Olivier said indeed is also a really good reason why Linkit is a very good module. For user management, one thing that we always need is like a role assign module. Usually we give our clients at least one user with which they can create their own user accounts. By default, Drupal does not give you any kind of role assigning process, and that is something that the role assign module does great. It just gives you this little extra option that when you create a user, you can actually assign a role as well. And then, of course, when it comes to things like search, the default Drupal search is very limited. You cannot, it's almost not usable, in fact. Since we have the actual Search API maintainer sitting with us at the table, of course we swear by Search API for everything search related. I think that's about it. Those are the modules that we install almost every time, or that we install every time.
And then it's scenario specific or project specific. Eh?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So next up in the list here is teaming question.
Yes. Well, I think this will probably be the last question. We have actually two more questions on our list, but I think the last question is not that interesting. So pretty much the only question we had around teaming is basically a beginner question. I am new to Drupal 8 teaming, module dev, site building. Where do I start? This is a question I get a lot, in fact, and the answer is pretty much, it might be a boring answer, but I can really advise you to start with the Drupal.org documentation. The documentation for Drupal 8 is miles ahead of the documentation that was written for Drupal 7. It's really very concise, very to the point, it's very well, clearly written. And that should always be your starting point for this. If you want to start creating a custom team, if you just want to know how to install a team, if you want to know how to install a module, please first check the documentation. It will almost always give you the answers that you want. If you're looking for really specific teaming information, all of the Drupal.org documentation is actually divided into different categories. There is one big teaming category which has a lot of different sub-guides, so definitely go into that. As I said before, documentation, check that first. Outside of that, your best bet is that there's probably a tutorial on Google that can pretty much point you in the direction that you want. This is a bit of the thing with teaming. Teaming is, in its own, it's very basic, it's very easy. There are not very much complex things that can be done when teaming something. The thing with teaming is that it's a lot of things that come together. You have your HTML, you have your CSS, you have your JavaScript, then you have your Twig templating, you have the Drupal backend on itself, and then you have all the modules in between that interact with your front-end layer. So on that part, I can only advise you to take it step by step, focus on one little part, try and get that in order, then focus on something else. And if you consulted the documents, you've tried it yourself, you've Googled, and you haven't found a decent tutorial, then I think the best question is to go look for some help on like the IRC, for example. I know Drupal has a very active IRC chat. I'm pretty sure there's probably also a teaming specific channel for that. I know that there's at least one big Drupal teaming Slack group around. There are a few channels around on the internet as well, such as on the Reddit.
I think that's part of the beauty of the Drupal community, is that everybody is willing to help and willing to spend time into figuring out what your exact problem is and try to help the best they can, because helping somebody while the question is coming through text on IRC, it's not always easy. So that's a good advice for people asking questions, is be as clear as you can be. Try to ask your question with all the details you can provide, and have a bit of patience, because IRC is not always fast, because people in different time zones and so on and so on. So keep that also in mind, that not everybody's going to dive onto your question and going to chew through the question and provide the answer right away.
So Maarten asked one more question.
Yeah.
And since he's the only one actually watching right now, I'd love to answer it. So he asked, do you prefer Drupal console over Drush?
Yeah. What I love about Drupal console is make me my files for this. So the templating, yeah. That's a cool part, but sometimes I'm still confused. Maybe I just need to read more about the differences. But is Drupal console, I think, did not when it was created or announced, it was not a direct competitor for Drush. I don't know if today that is the case or it's still not the case. But there are things you can do with Drush and Drupal console, so it sometimes can become a bit fuzzy. Which one do I use? I'd love to stick with Drupal console for the scaffolding and other things I do with Drush. But I don't know, maybe you guys know more about that topic.
I don't use Drupal console.
Yeah.
I think it's really slow. It doesn't work very well for me. I have to reconfigure it every single time for every different website that I use. I don't like it either, but maybe that's a personal preference.
You just love to write code, so
it doesn't do much in the code generation
true.
part for me either. I mean, I just copy an existing thing and paste that in, and that also works.
No, that's true.
So for me, it's Drush, definitely.
All right.
Well, I'm a front-ender, so all I need is to clear my cache 15 times. So I'm a Drush man myself. I've not even worked with Drupal console.
Well, Maarten also replies here, I love console since it extends from Symfony, but the one weak point is that it can have a dependency on a working Drupal installation.
Yes, so that's one of the things that I like working with Drupal console when I know that I can be on one project for the entire week. Mm-hmm. If I have to switch 77 times on a day, then I prefer using Drush because it's easier to I just haven't unlearned all the Drush commands yet. So it's easier to port that Drupal 7 knowledge in.
Okay.
So I think that's everything that we wanted to discuss.
Yeah, we're going to round up here. So for the people watching now and people watching this video later, if you want to follow us on Twitter at Dazzle the Web, please do that. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to be informed with notices or notifications each time we would have a session like this or other video uploads. And everybody, thanks for watching and have a pleasant evening.
Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye-bye.